Settle in, dear listener, and allow me to take you to a place where certainty dissolves as easily as candle smoke. Elderwyn Manor rises from the countryside with the quiet confidence of old wealth and older secrets. Its stone walls have witnessed generations of order, formal dinners, inherited grudges, and rules that were never meant to be questioned. Here, everything has its place. Everyone has their role. And nothing is supposed to go missing until it does. On a cold autumn morning, the household awakens to a disturbance that defies explanation. A body, clearly seen, clearly identified, and officially declared, has vanished from a locked room overnight. No broken windows, no forced doors, no footprints in the dew outside the manor walls. Only absence. Authorities are summoned, explanations offered, then quietly withdrawn. Whispers replace statements. Servants exchange glances they do not explain, and the manor, once proud of its order, begins to feel unstable, as though reality itself has shifted slightly out of alignment. Into this confusion steps Hercule Poirot. Poirot understands that a vanishing corpse is not merely a puzzle, it is a message. Someone at Elderwyn Manor wants control over the narrative, over memory itself. When a body disappears, so does certainty. Doubt spreads. Truth becomes negotiable. As Poirot walks the corridors of Elderwyn Manor, he observes more than architecture. He observes habits, rituals, the quiet assumptions people make when they believe rules will protect them. And he quickly realizes that the disappearance is not the crime. It is the method. Tonight's mystery is not about how a body vanished. It is about why someone needed it gone. Listen carefully. Watch how denial replaces fear, how authority attempts to overwrite reality, and how absence can speak louder than any confession. Welcome to Elderwyn Manor, where even death refuses to stay where it belongs, the body that should not move. Elderwyn Manor had always prided itself on certainty. Every bell rang at its appointed hour. Every door was locked each night in the same order. Every servant knew precisely where to stand, where to speak, and, most importantly, where not to question. The manor functioned not as a home, but as a mechanism polished by decades of repetition. That was why the body's disappearance struck with such unsettling force. Hercule Poirot arrived just after dawn, his motor car crunching softly along the gravel drive as mist clung to the low hedges. The manor rose ahead of him, its windows dark and symmetrical, offering no hint of the disruption inside. Poirot adjusted his gloves and stepped out slowly, his eyes already measuring distances, alignments, expectations. Inside, the household waited. Sir Reginald Fenton, the owner of Elderwyn Manor, stood rigidly near the fireplace in the morning room, his posture betraying outrage more than grief. Beside him hovered Mrs. Eliza Fenton, pale and tightly composed. A handful of servants lingered near the doorway, silent, their attention carefully divided between obedience and unease. Inspector Harold Baines greeted Poirot with visible relief. "Thank heaven you're here," Baines said quietly. "This one refuses to behave." Poirot inclined his head. "Bodies," he replied mildly, "are usually very well mannered. It is the living who complicate matters." The facts, as presented, were absurd in their simplicity. The previous evening, Mr. Leonard Crowhurst, a distant cousin and occasional guest at the manor, had collapsed during dinner. A physician was summoned from the village. Death was certified, heart failure, sudden but plausible. The body was moved to the blue drawing room, laid respectfully on a sofa, and the doors were locked for the night. By morning, the room was empty. Poirot requested to see it at once. The blue drawing room lived up to its name. Walls upholstered in muted blue silk, tall windows draped in heavy curtains, a thick rug covering the floor. Poirot noted immediately what wasn't there. No disturbance, no sign of removal. The sofa cushions remained indented. A faint shadow marked where a body had rested. Poirot knelt carefully, studying the rug. "No dragging," he murmured. "No lifting marks." Inspector Baines nodded. The windows were locked, the doors sealed. No one entered. Poirot rose slowly. "Then," Poirot said, "someone who belonged here moved him." Poirot turned his attention to the locks. They were old but well maintained. The keyholes showed no signs of tampering. Poirot examined them with a small magnifying glass, his brow furrowing slightly. "Who holds keys to this room?" Poirot asked. Sir Reginald answered stiffly. "Myself, my wife, and the butler, Mr. James Holloway." Poirot's gaze flicked toward Holloway, a tall man with ironed precision in both dress and expression. "And who locked the room?" Poirot asked. "I did," Holloway replied calmly. "At 11 precisely." Poirot nodded. "Precision is admirable." Poirot then requested to see the physician. Dr. Malcolm Reeves arrived shortly thereafter, clutching his hat nervously. "You are certain of death?" Poirot asked gently. "Absolutely," Reeves said. "No pulse, no breath, fixed pupils." Poirot studied him. "And yet," he said softly, "the body has chosen to relocate." A flicker of discomfort crossed Reeves's face. Poirot returned to the drawing room, surveying it again, this time as a stage rather than a space. The collapse had occurred at dinner. The death had been declared. The body had been displayed. The locks had been secured. And still, absence. Poirot's eyes fell upon a small side table near the sofa. A glass of brandy stood untouched, its surface unbroken by dust. Poirot lifted it carefully, sniffing. "Brandy," he said, "and something else." Inspector Baines leaned closer. "Poison?" Poirot shook his head. "No, something more theatrical." Poirot straightened. "This," he said quietly, "is not a disappearance of convenience. It is a disappearance of intention." Sir Reginald bristled. "Are you suggesting?" Poirot raised a hand. "I am suggesting," Poirot said, "that someone wished the body to be seen first, officially, undeniably." Poirot turned toward the household. "And then wished it to be gone." The servants exchanged glances. Mrs. Fenton clutched her shawl more tightly. Poirot folded his hands. "A vanishing corpse," Poirot concluded, "is not meant to hide a crime. It is meant to rewrite it." Outside, the manor remained still. Inside, certainty had begun to rot. Certainty is a performance. Hercule Poirot had often remarked that truth did not fear examination. It was certainty that did. At Elderwyn Manor, certainty was everywhere, polished, rehearsed, and carefully displayed. Yet the absence of Leonard Crowhurst's body had torn a seam through that performance. revealing how much effort it took to maintain the illusion of order. Poirot began his second day not in the vanished drawing room, but in the breakfast parlor. He had learned long ago that people revealed more over routine than interrogation. At breakfast, habits asserted themselves. Authority relaxed. Contradictions emerged quietly. Sir Reginald Fenton presided at the head of the table, newspaper folded precisely beside his plate. Mrs. Fenton sat opposite, stirring her tea, though she did not drink it. The servants moved with subdued efficiency, their eyes carefully neutral. Poirot watched. No one mentioned the missing body. Routine, Poirot thought, is the strongest form of denial. He waited until plates were cleared before speaking. "Last night," Poirot said mildly, "must have been unsettling." Sir Reginald stiffened. "Elderwyn Manor does not panic." Poirot smiled politely. "No, it performs calm." Sir Reginald bristled. "Are you accusing us of theatrics?" Poirot inclined his head. "Only of rehearsal." Poirot excused himself and requested to see the household logs. Mr. Holloway, the butler, produced them at once. The entries were immaculate. Times recorded, doors locked, lights extinguished. Poirot examined the page for the previous evening. 11 o'clock, Poirot murmured. "You locked the blue drawing room." "Yes," Holloway replied evenly. "And after that?" Poirot asked. "I retired." Poirot glanced up. "Directly?" "Yes." Poirot nodded and turned to the next page. "Midnight," Poirot continued. "The night footman records a round." "That is standard," Holloway said. Poirot tapped the page gently. "Standard routines leave patterns. Patterns leave gaps." Poirot requested to speak with the night footman, a young man named Edwin Marsh. Marsh appeared nervous, twisting his cap in his hands. "You made your rounds at midnight?" Poirot asked kindly. "Yes, sir." "And did you notice anything unusual?" Marsh hesitated. "No, sir." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You are allowed to notice, Monsieur Marsh." Marsh swallowed. "I heard a sound around the blue drawing room." Sir Reginald's head snapped up. "Why was this not reported?" Marsh flushed. "It sounded like furniture being adjusted." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Adjusted," Poirot repeated, "not moved." "Yes, sir." Poirot dismissed Marsh gently. Poirot next turned his attention to Dr. Malcolm Reeves. He found the physician pacing in the garden, his composure fraying. "You certified death," Poirot said calmly. "Yes." "And you are confident?" Poirot asked. Reeves hesitated. "He was still." Poirot tilted his head. "Stillness is not death, doctor. It is a condition." Reeves rubbed his forehead. There was no pulse. Poirot nodded. "Measured how?" "With my fingers." Poirot said nothing for a moment. "Doctor," Poirot asked softly, "have you ever been wrong?" Reeves looked away. Poirot returned once more to the blue drawing room, now empty and unnerving in its tidiness. He stood where the body had lain, closing his eyes briefly. Crowhurst had collapsed publicly. His death had been witnessed, declared, ritualized. Poirot opened his eyes. "Certainty," Poirot murmured, "is often staged for an audience." He noticed something he had missed before: the curtains. They were heavy, lined, and drawn not fully open but not fully closed either, enough to block casual view from outside, enough to allow shadow. Poirot examined the sofa again. Indentations remained, but they were shallow. Poirot straightened abruptly. "A body of a grown man," Poirot said quietly, "leaves a deeper impression." Poirot summoned Inspector Baines. "Inspector," Poirot said, "are we certain Leonard Crowhurst was dead when placed here?" Baines frowned. "The doctor—" Poirot raised a finger. "Certainty," Poirot said, "is being performed." Poirot now saw the design emerging. Crowhurst collapsed, but may not have died. He was declared dead quickly, placed in a private room. Witnesses were discouraged from lingering. The house was locked down, not to protect the body, but to control the narrative. Poirot's gaze drifted to the servants' corridor. "A vanishing corpse," Poirot said, "requires cooperation." He turned slowly. "And cooperation," Poirot continued, "is easiest to obtain when people believe they are following rules." Poirot folded his hands. "If Leonard Crowhurst walked out of this room," Poirot said, "he did so with help." The manor seemed to hold its breath. Poirot smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "Now we are no longer chasing a ghost." The man who benefited by being dead. If Leonard Crowhurst was not a corpse, then he was an actor. And every actor, Poirot knew, performed for a reason. Hercule Poirot began the third day at Elderwyn Manor by asking a question no one had yet dared to voice aloud. "Who profits," he asked Inspector Baines quietly, "when a man is believed to be dead?" The inspector frowned. "Inheritance? Debts? Scandal avoidance?" Poirot nodded. "Yes." "And freedom." They reviewed Crowhurst's background in detail. Leonard Crowhurst was a distant cousin to Sir Reginald Fenton, invited to Elderwyn Manor under the pretext of rest and reconciliation. On paper, he appeared unremarkable, a gentleman of modest means, quiet habits, no immediate family. Poirot's eyes moved past the surface. Crowhurst had debts, significant ones. Poirot studied bank correspondence recovered from Crowhurst's traveling case, overdue notices, increasingly urgent, written in the careful language of institutions that had lost patience. Poirot tapped the page lightly. "A man pursued by debt," Poirot said, "often seeks disappearance more than death." Poirot next requested access to the manor's unused west wing, rooms long shuttered, corridors seldom walked. Sir Reginald protested mildly, citing disrepair, but Poirot insisted. Dust lay thick on the floors, undisturbed except for one telling detail, a faint set of footprints near a servant's stairwell, partially erased but recent. Poirot knelt. "These," Poirot said, "do not belong to a servant. Too narrow, too careful." They led toward a secondary exit, a door rarely used, opening onto a hedge-lined path that curved toward the stables. Poirot smiled faintly. "A stage exit," he murmured. Poirot then turned his attention to Mr. James Holloway, the butler. Holloway was impeccable, reserved, and deeply invested in Elderwyn Manor's reputation. "You locked the blue drawing-room," Poirot said gently. "Yes." "And you ensured no one disturbed it?" "That is my duty." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. And duty often becomes complicity when combined with loyalty." Holloway stiffened. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot shook his head. "No.
I am asking why you would assist a performance."
Holloway hesitated for the first time.
"Crowhurst approached me," Holloway said quietly. "Weeks ago."
Poirot's eyes sharpened.
"Ah." "He said there would be a situation," Holloway continued.
"He asked if I would ensure privacy." Poirot nodded. "And what did he offer?" Holloway's voice dropped. "Protection. From scandal." Poirot said nothing. Crowhurst, it emerged, had threatened to expose a long-buried family matter involving Sir Reginald, an indiscretion that would tarnish the Manor's name irrevocably. Holloway, whose entire identity was bound to that name, chose preservation over propriety. Poirot next summoned Mrs. Eliza Fenton. She received him with composed fragility. "Mrs. Fenton," Poirot said gently, "did you know Leonard Crowhurst intended to disappear?" Her eyes flickered. "He spoke of escape," she admitted. "He said death was final." Poirot nodded. "And disappearance?" "Reversible," she said softly. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You assisted him." She closed her eyes. "I ensured no one interrupted. That is all." Poirot straightened. "So," Poirot summarized quietly, "Crowhurst collapses publicly, dramatic but controlled. A doctor confirms death too quickly. The body is placed where it can be seen, then removed under cover of routine. Locks provide reassurance. Authority provides silence." Poirot turned to Inspector Baines. "This," Poirot said, "is not a murder mystery." Baines blinked. "Then what is it?" Poirot's gaze hardened. "It is a fraud," Poirot said, "and possibly something worse." Because there remained one detail Poirot could not ignore: Crowhurst's collapse. Poirot returned to the dining room where it had occurred. He studied the chair, the placement, the glass Crowhurst had been drinking from. Poirot examined the residue carefully. "Not poison," Poirot murmured. "A sedative, enough to induce collapse, not death." Poirot straightened slowly. "Dr. Reeves," Poirot said later that afternoon, "you made a mistake." Reeves paled. I believed." "You believed what you were told," Poirot said gently. "That the man was dead. That certainty had already been agreed upon." Reeves nodded miserably. "I didn't check long enough." Poirot sighed softly. "So Leonard Crowhurst," Poirot concluded, "is alive, hiding, assisted by loyalty, fear, and reputation." Poirot turned back toward the Manor. "But now," he said quietly, "the performance is unraveling." For disappearance required continued cooperation, and cooperation, once examined, always failed. When death pretends. A staged death, Poirot knew, was a dangerous fiction. It required precision, cooperation, and, most perilously, time. For the longer a lie was maintained, the more people became invested in its survival. And when a deception involved death, the temptation to make it real often followed. At Elderwyn Manor, that temptation had begun to stir. Hercule Poirot sensed it in the tightening expressions of the household, in the way conversations ended abruptly when he entered a room, in the subtle shift from secrecy to fear. The performance was no longer confident. It was strained. Poirot began the day by requesting a full account of Leonard Crowhurst's movements prior to the dinner. Inspector Baines produced what little had been recorded. Crowhurst had spent the afternoon in the library alone. He had requested brandy before dinner. He had complained of fatigue. Poirot nodded. All necessary pretexts. Poirot then asked to inspect the library. The room smelled faintly of leather and smoke. Bookshelves lined the walls, heavy with family history. Poirot moved slowly, trailing his fingers along the spines until he reached a side table near an armchair. A glass ring marked the polished wood. Poirot smiled faintly. "Brandy," he murmured again. He examined the decanter. The stopper was slightly misaligned. Poirot turned to Inspector Baines. "Crowhurst prepared himself, but someone else prepared the house." Poirot requested to see Mrs. Eliza Fenton's private sitting room. She received him without protest, her composure brittle. "You knew Crowhurst's plan," Poirot said gently.
"But you did not know how far it would go."
Mrs. Fenton hesitated. "He only wanted time to escape his creditors." Poirot nodded. "And what if escape failed?" Her silence answered him. Poirot pressed on. "A staged death is meant to end scrutiny," Poirot said, "but it creates a new danger, the danger of discovery." Poirot's eyes met hers. "Someone here feared that danger." Mrs. Fenton's hands trembled slightly. Poirot left her and sought out Mr. Holloway, the butler, once more. Holloway stood rigidly in the pantry, his back straight as a spine carved of wood. "You ensured privacy," Poirot said. "You ensured routine." "Yes." "And you ensured silence," Poirot continued. "Yes." Poirot lowered his voice. "But did you ensure safety?" Holloway hesitated. Poirot leaned closer. "If Crowhurst were discovered alive," Poirot said, "the consequences would be catastrophic. Fraud, public scandal, legal ruin." Holloway swallowed. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot straightened. "I am suggesting," Poirot said, "that someone may decide the performance must end with a real death." The implication struck hard. Poirot turned back to the blue drawing room one more time. He stood where the body had lain, imagining the sequence anew, not as deception but as escalation. A sedated man, a locked room, an opportunity. Poirot noticed something chilling. The sofa had been repositioned slightly since his last visit, barely perceptible, but intentional. Poirot summoned Inspector Baines at once. "Inspector," Poirot said, "Leonard Crowhurst may still be alive, but he is no longer safe." Baines frowned. "You think someone plans to—" Poirot nodded. "Kill him properly." The motive was obvious now. Crowhurst's disappearance protected reputations only as long as he remained silent. If he returned, he could expose everyone involved, and silence, Poirot knew, was easiest to guarantee permanently. Poirot ordered a discreet search of the manor's grounds and outbuildings, including the stables, west wing,
And unused servants' passages.
As constables dispersed, Poirot remained still. "A performance," he murmured, "always risks becoming reality." Moments later, a shout echoed from the direction of the stables. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The lie had reached its most dangerous stage. The lie that demands a corpse. A deception can survive uncertainty. It cannot survive exposure. As Poirot followed Inspector Baines toward the stables, he understood that the staged death of Leonard Crowhurst had crossed a critical threshold. What began as a performance designed to erase a man from the world had now created something far more dangerous, a need
for finality. And finality, Poirot knew, often arrived in the form of a real body. The stables stood apart from the manor, their stone walls damp with morning mist. A groom hovered nearby, pale and shaking. "We heard movement," the man said, "from the old tack room." Poirot entered slowly. The room smelled of hay and oil. Light filtered through a narrow window, illuminating a figure slumped against the wall. Leonard Crowhurst was alive. Barely. His wrists were bound loosely, his head lolling forward, his breathing shallow but present. A cloth lay discarded nearby, smelling faintly of ether. Poirot knelt immediately, checking his pulse with practiced calm. "Alive," Poirot said quietly, "and frightened." Inspector Baines exhaled sharply. Someone tried to finish it. Poirot nodded. Crowhurst's eyes fluttered open weakly. Recognition flickered. "You," Crowhurst whispered hoarsely. "I knew you would come." Poirot straightened. "Someone," Poirot said gently, "has decided your disappearance was no longer sufficient." Crowhurst swallowed. "I told them I would stay hidden, that I would never return." Poirot's voice hardened slightly. "But you knew too much." Crowhurst nodded faintly. "They said the house couldn't survive uncertainty." Poirot turned to Inspector Baines. "Remove him quietly," Poirot said. "Medical care immediately."
No announcement.
As Crowhurst was carried away, Poirot's thoughts sharpened. Only someone deeply invested in Elderwyn Manor's reputation and terrified of scandal would risk murder to preserve a lie. Someone who believed order must be protected at any cost. Poirot returned to the manor alone. The household awaited him. Sir Reginald Fenton stood rigid near the fireplace once more, his expression brittle with restraint. Mrs. Fenton sat nearby, hands clasped tightly. Holloway hovered near the doorway, his posture flawless and strained. Poirot addressed them calmly. "Leonard Crowhurst is alive," Poirot said. The room reacted instantly. Mrs. Fenton gasped. Holloway closed his eyes. Sir Reginald stiffened, but did not look surprised. Poirot observed this carefully. "Someone attempted to kill him this morning," Poirot continued. "That attempt failed." Poirot let the words settle. "A staged death," Poirot said, "is an unstable solution. Eventually, someone decides the performance must end." Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. "You knew Crowhurst's debts," Poirot said. "You knew his threats, and you knew that his return would destroy this house." Sir Reginald's voice was tight. "Elderwyn Manor must endure." Poirot nodded. "And so a man nearly died to preserve it." Sir Reginald's control finally fractured. "He was going to ruin us," Sir Reginald snapped. "Expose family matters buried for decades." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "And you believed murder would preserve honor?" Sir Reginald fell silent. Poirot turned toward Holloway. "You assisted the disappearance," Poirot said, "but this morning you went further." Holloway's composure collapsed. "I only meant to scare him, to ensure he stayed hidden." Poirot shook his head slowly. "Fear," Poirot said, "is never obedient." Poirot stepped back. Leonard Crowhurst's staged death nearly became real because too many people decided reputation mattered more than life.
Poirot met Sir Reginald's eyes one last time.
"The lie demanded a corpse," Poirot said quietly, "and you were prepared to provide one."
Inspector Baines stepped forward. "Sir Reginald Fenton," he said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." As the constables moved in, Elderwyn Manor finally lost its certainty, not through scandal, but through truth. Tradition as a weapon. Once Sir Reginald Fenton was led away from Elderwyn Manor, the house seemed to exhale, not with relief, but with exposure. Hercule Poirot remained standing in the morning room long after the constables had gone, observing the subtle collapse of certainty that followed authorities' removal. The furniture was unchanged, the portraits still watched from the walls, yet something essential had shifted. Tradition, once the manor's shield, now lay bare as its most dangerous weapon. Poirot turned to the remaining household. "Elderwyn Manor," he said calmly, "has not been ruled by cruelty. It has been ruled by habit." Mrs. Eliza Fenton sat heavily in a chair, her composure unraveling thread by thread. Mr. Holloway stood nearby, no longer rigid, just tired. Poirot addressed them gently. "You believed you were preserving something noble," Poirot said. "But tradition, when it demands silence, becomes indistinguishable from coercion." Poirot requested access to the family records room, a place few entered willingly. Mrs. Fenton hesitated, then nodded. The room lay beyond the west wing, a narrow chamber lined with ledgers, correspondence, and legal documents spanning generations. Poirot examined them slowly. Here were the rules of Elderwyn Manor, written not in ink alone, but expectation. Disputes settled privately, scandals erased quietly, servants sworn to discretion, family matters handled within the house. Poirot closed one ledger carefully. "Leonard Crowhurst did not invent this system," Poirot said. "He exploited it." Inspector Baines joined him, reviewing the records. "This goes back decades," Baines murmured. Poirot nodded.
"And that is why it worked." Poirot returned to the drawing room where the staged death had occurred. He addressed Mrs. Fenton once more. "You did not wish Leonard dead," Poirot said. "You wished him gone." She nodded faintly. "We have always dealt with problems quietly." Poirot's voice softened. "And quiet solutions grow louder with time." Poirot then turned to Holloway. "You were taught loyalty above judgment," Poirot said. "You enforced rules without questioning them." Holloway's voice cracked. "This house was my life." Poirot met his gaze. "And that is why it nearly became your crime." Later that afternoon, Poirot visited Leonard Crowhurst under guard, recovering in a nearby clinic. Crowhurst looked smaller now, less theatrical, more human. "I never meant it to go that far," Crowhurst said weakly. Poirot inclined his head. "You believed tradition would protect you." Crowhurst closed his eyes. "It always had." Poirot did not argue. Instead, he returned to Elderwyn Manor for one final reckoning. He gathered the household staff, not to accuse, but to explain. "You were not villains," Poirot said. "You were participants in a system that rewarded silence." He paused. "When truth is managed like inheritance," Poirot continued, "it eventually demands blood." The words settled deeply. Poirot turned toward the great windows overlooking the grounds. "Leonard Crowhurst lived," Poirot said,
but only because the lie collapsed before it finished its work.
Poirot adjusted his cuffs.
Tradition, he concluded, must serve life, not replace it.
The manor stood silent, not obediently, but reflectively. And for the first time, that silence did not conceal danger. With Sir Reginald gone and Leonard Crowhurst alive, Elderwyn Manor entered a strange interim, neither innocent nor yet condemned. The house had not fallen silent. Instead, it existed in a state of cautious suspension,
as though every wall and corridor were waiting to learn what it was now permitted to be. Servants spoke softly but freely. Doors, once closed as a matter of protocol, stood ajar. For the first time in living memory, the manor felt uncertain of itself. Hercule Poirot understood that uncertainty was not weakness, it was opportunity. He spent the morning walking the corridors, speaking not as a detective, but as a listener. He spoke with maids who admitted they had always known when to look away, with gardeners who confessed they had been trained to forget what they overheard, with clerks who quietly destroyed letters marked private family matter without ever opening them. A culture, Poirot saw, was revealing itself piece by piece. Inspector Baines joined Poirot near the long gallery where portraits of Fenton ancestors lined the walls, men and women captured in oil, their expressions confident, certain, unyielding. "They all look so sure," Baines said. Poirot nodded. "Certainty ages poorly." Poirot turned his attention to the legal consequences now unfolding. Solicitors arrived from London. Statements were taken. Financial records were seized. Elderwyn Manor's long-protected reputation was beginning to fracture under formal scrutiny. Mrs. Eliza Fenton met Poirot privately that afternoon. "I thought," she said quietly, "that if we kept things contained, no one would be harmed." Poirot regarded her gently. "Containment is not the same as protection." She nodded, tears welling. "I see that now." Poirot did not absolve her, but neither did he condemn. "Responsibility," Poirot said, "is not erased by intention." Meanwhile, Leonard Crowhurst's survival had created an unexpected problem. Alive, he was dangerous, not as a villain, but as a witness. His testimony threatened to expose not only the recent deception, but decades of discreet arrangements. Poirot visited Crowhurst once more at the clinic. "You are no longer invisible," Poirot said. Crowhurst managed a weak smile. "I never truly was."
Poirot leaned forward slightly.
"You staged your death to escape consequence," Poirot said. "Instead, you have forced truth into the open." Crowhurst closed his eyes. "I didn't think they'd try to kill me." Poirot's voice was calm. "When lies grow too large, they must be fed."
Back at the manor, Poirot observed a subtle shift in behavior. Some servants began volunteering information, small inconsistencies, overlooked moments, quiet orders that had once seemed unquestionable. Each detail added weight to the case. Poirot assembled Inspector Baines that evening. "The danger now," Poirot said, "is not concealment, but retaliation." Baines frowned. "From whom?" Poirot gestured toward the manor itself. "Systems defend themselves," Poirot said, "even when their leaders fall." Poirot ensured protective oversight for key witnesses. Doors once guarded by tradition were now guarded by law. As dusk settled, Poirot stood alone in the blue drawing room. The space felt different without its illusion. No body, no ritual, just a room that had briefly served as a stage for deception. Poirot reflected. The crime at Elderwyn Manor had not been the attempted murder, nor the staged death, nor even the conspiracy. It had been the belief that appearances mattered more than truth, and that belief, Poirot knew, was far harder to dismantle than any locked room. Word count, approximately 980 words. Miss Marple had always believed that communities revealed their true nature not during crisis, but in the quiet days that followed. At Morningside, the crisis had passed, the whispers had been named, the truth had been spoken aloud, and yet the village felt strangely unmoored, as though the familiar order had been gently but irrevocably shifted. The rectory remained closed, its curtains drawn, its rooms silent. Without Mrs. Finch's presence, the house felt oddly incomplete, like a sentence left unfinished.
Parish affairs were temporarily handled from the church office, where Lydia Gray worked late into the evenings, sorting papers that had long gone unquestioned. Miss Marple visited her one afternoon. "He kept everything," Lydia said, gesturing to the stacks of folders. "Records, letters, drafts of sermons never delivered." "And secrets?" Miss Marple asked mildly. Lydia hesitated. "Perhaps not secrets, just things no one wanted examined." Miss Marple nodded. "Examination is rarely welcomed." In the days that followed, small changes began to appear. Tea was no longer served automatically after services. Doors were left open. Conversations extended beyond pleasantries. People asked questions they would once have swallowed. Bernard Hale delivered his first sermon as acting rector that Sunday. His voice shook slightly, but his words were honest. "We believed silence protected us," he said. "Instead, it blinded us." Miss Marple listened from the back pew, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outside, after the service, villagers lingered longer than usual, speaking in low but open tones. "I never asked why she controlled everything," Mrs. Carter admitted. "I thought devotion explained it," another replied. "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, "devotion often disguises ownership." That afternoon, Miss Marple walked once more through the rectory garden. The roses were untended now, their blooms slightly wild, less symmetrical than before. Healthier, she thought. Near the back gate, she noticed a small stone bench. Reverend Ashcombe had often sat there, reading in the late afternoons. Miss Marple sat briefly herself. He had been a good man, she believed. Flawed, certainly, afraid of shame, afraid of disappointing those who depended on him. And those fears had been quietly exploited, not out of malice, but out of misplaced love. Miss Marple reflected on Mrs. Finch. Her crime had not been born of hatred. It had been born of certainty, that she knew what was best, that she alone could decide when truth became too dangerous. Such certainty, Miss Marple knew, had undone many careful lives. As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to her lodgings and began packing. Her visit to Morningside was drawing to a close. There was nothing more for her to uncover. The village now had work of its own to do. Before retiring, Miss Marple wrote a short note to Bernard Hale. "Truth requires witnesses," she wrote. "Do not let politeness send it away again." She sealed the envelope and set it aside. Outside, the church bell rang for evening prayers. Its sound was softer now, less commanding, more inviting. Miss Marple smiled faintly.
Morningside Rectory would never again be quite as quiet as it once was. And that, she felt certain, was for the best. Call to action. Do you think Morningside will truly change? Or will comfort eventually restore the old silences? Share your thoughts below. Truth demands witnesses. Truth, Poirot reflected, was never content to exist privately. Once uncovered, it required witnesses. At Elderwyn Manor, that moment had arrived. The house no longer belonged solely to those who lived within its walls. Solicitors, investigators, and officials now moved through its corridors with purposeful steps, carrying clipboards instead of tradition. Statements were formalized. Records were seized. Elderwyn Manor, once insulated by discretion, was now exposed to daylight. Hercule Poirot watched this transformation with measured calm. He knew that exposure was not revenge. It was necessity. Inspector Baines joined him in the great hall, where portraits of the Fenton lineage stared down with the same unyielding confidence they always had. Yet now, those painted eyes seemed less commanding, more brittle. "They'll all be questioned," Baines said. "Servants, family, associates." Poirot nodded. "Good. Truth grows stronger when it is shared." Poirot requested one final assembly, not of authority, but of accountability.
The remaining household gathered: servants, clerks, caretakers, and Mrs. Eliza Fenton. No one stood at the head. No one presided. Poirot addressed them without accusation. "Leonard Crowhurst's disappearance," Poirot said, "was made possible because too many people believed silence was their duty." He paused. "Today, silence becomes complicity no longer." Poirot explained the full sequence clearly: Crowhurst's debts, the staged collapse, the premature declaration of death, the removal of the body, and the attempted final silencing. Each element was laid bare, not dramatically, but methodically. The room absorbed it. Margaret, one of the senior maids, spoke for the first time. "We thought keeping quiet was loyalty." Poirot met her eyes. "Loyalty to what?" She hesitated. "To the house?" Poirot nodded. "A house is stone. Loyalty belongs to people." Poirot then turned to Mrs. Fenton. "You did not order harm," Poirot said gently, "but you permitted deception." Tears filled her eyes. "I believed it was kinder." Poirot shook his head softly. "Kindness that avoids truth becomes cruelty by delay." Later that afternoon, Poirot accompanied Inspector Baines to the magistrate's temporary office set up nearby. Warrants were signed, charges prepared. Elderwyn Manor's name, once whispered with respect, now appeared plainly on legal documents. Poirot observed without satisfaction. Justice, he knew, was not a victory. It was a correction. As dusk approached, Poirot returned once more to the blue drawing-room. The space felt unremarkable now. No shadow of drama, no echo of absence. Just a room that had briefly served as a lie. Poirot stood where Leonard Crowhurst had been laid. "A corpse that vanished," Poirot murmured, "taught this house the cost of pretending." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. The manor's windows reflected the fading light, not concealing it, but accepting it. Poirot adjusted his coat. Elderwyn Manor would endure. But it would endure differently. under scrutiny, under memory, under the gaze of those no longer willing to look away. And that, Poirot believed, was the only future truth would allow. When the body returns. Elderwin Manor awoke to a different kind of morning. There were still bells to be rung and doors to be opened, but the rhythm had changed. It was no longer the rhythm of performance. It was the rhythm of reckoning. The house had learned, at last, that order built on illusion could not be restored by habit alone. Hercule Poirot prepared to depart. He stood in the great hall, hat and gloves laid neatly on a side table, surveying the space that had once insisted upon certainty. Now certainty had been replaced by something less comfortable and far more honest. Inspector Baines joined him, a thin file tucked beneath his arm. "Charges will proceed," Baines said. "Conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder. The estate will be placed under review." Poirot nodded. "Good." "And Crowhurst?" Baines asked. "Alive," Poirot replied, "and accountable." Leonard Crowhurst's return to visibility had transformed him from ghost to burden. He would testify. He would repay what he could. He would live with the knowledge that his attempt to escape consequence had nearly produced a real death to match his false one. Poirot believed that was justice enough. Mrs. Eliza Fenton entered quietly. She looked smaller now, unarmored by certainty, her dignity no longer mistaken for authority. "The house will change," she said softly. "It must." Poirot inclined his head. "Change is not loss, madame. It is correction." She nodded, tears welling, not from accusation, but from recognition. Poirot walked the corridors one final time. The blue drawing room was empty, unremarkable, restored to what it had always been beneath the illusion. Simply a room. No ritual, no performance, no body, real or imagined. He paused at the threshold. A house, Poirot reflected, does not remember truth unless it is forced to. Outside, the gardens shimmered under late morning light. Staff moved openly, speaking when necessary, silent only when they chose to be. Tradition had not vanished, but it had been stripped of its authority to demand obedience. Poirot stepped into his motor car. As it pulled away, Elderwin Manor receded behind hedges and trees, no longer a monument to certainty, but a structure learning how to live with doubt. Poirot allowed himself a small, thoughtful smile. A corpse had vanished, a lie had taken its place, and truth, patient, persistent, had returned instead. That, Poirot believed, was how order was meant to be restored. Do you think truth restores order, or simply replaces illusion with responsibility? Share your final thoughts in the comments. After the performance ends. And so, dear listener, we leave Elderwin Manor, not in scandal, but in clarity. A body vanished, and in doing so, exposed a house that believed certainty could be manufactured, reputation preserved, and truth postponed indefinitely. But as Hercule Poirot reminds us, truth is not impressed by tradition. It waits, and when it returns, it does not ask permission. Leonard Crowhurst attempted to escape consequence by becoming a ghost. Others attempted to preserve order by maintaining the illusion. In the end, neither succeeded. For lies demand maintenance, and maintenance always costs more than honesty. This mystery was never truly about a corpse. It was about what people are willing to erase, and what they are willing to protect to keep appearances intact. If this story stayed with you, I invite you to share what struck you most.
Was it the audacity of the deception, or the quiet way an entire system supported it? Your reflections matter, and I read every one. If you enjoy immersive, slow-burning mysteries where psychology, power, and consequence intersect, consider subscribing and joining us again.
There are many houses like Elderwyn Manor, places where truth is carefully arranged. Poirot, as always, will be listening for what doesn't quite fit. Until our next story, rest well, observe closely, and remember, the most dangerous lies are the ones everyone agrees to believe.